I don't know why my camera shuts off randomly sometimes. Okay. So here I am with the 455 gasket on the aluminum head, and what you can see is the crevice volume is yeah, it's not at the absolute minimum. If you've got deep pockets and you want to order cometic gaskets, probably because you want to, manipulate your compression ratio a bit. Let's say your pistons are only coming up to 15 thousandths within the top of the bore or the deck. And so you order cometic gaskets that are 27 thousandths thick, right? Well, while you're up to it, then you can also tell them the bore size you want. I think the ideal bore size here would be about 4.2 or possibly 4.125. So what I've got here is a 4.25, 4¼ inch bore gasket. And this is going to work. It's giving me just a little more crevice volume around the sides of the chambers than I'd like, but it's certainly a lot better than the 403 gasket, okay, which is 4.4 bore, okay. So as far as inexpensive head gaskets go, this is the best compromise. And since it's the exact thickness that I want, because my pistons are coming 10 thousandths out of the deck, and it is a budget project like they all are, I'm going to keep this one. Okay, so order the 455 gasket set. Speaking of which, let's move on to intake manifold issues really quick. Okay. Because the ports are so big, you see the intake ports here, I think I had told you they're 2.4 tall. Okay. The stock Oldsmobile gasket, intake gasket for 350, which I happen to like, the sheet metal gasket, there it is not going to work. You see the size of these ports? They're not nearly as tall. Okay, that's going to give you overlap. Now the problem is, and you'd think, well, I can just get in there with my die grinder and size this. Well, maybe you could, but here's the problem. These gaskets are one-time use only. If you've been reusing these, you're bound to have intake manifold leaks because they're embossed. Right? You see that some machine has created a print there that gets crushed when you torque this down. And so if you try to reuse this, you're going to lose that seal, and then you're relying on just your gasket sealer, which isn't the way it's meant to be. Okay? Because any imperfections in the plane of your decks, or your intake manifold, or your intake manifold mating surface on the head, you're relying on this to work. Okay, so I had to order the big block style aftermarket gaskets, and you can see these are much taller ports. I'll put it next to it. Okay, you can see those are much taller ports, and there are several companies making these. These happen to be SCE 179102 gaskets, okay, and they're going to work. You can also see that they don't have the exhaust crossover, so that's fine too. That's going to seal that. There is a problem, however, with using this kind of gasket. There's a reason Oldsmobile specs these kind of gaskets. As we look at my Performer intake again, quickly, what you can see is I took this off an engine. I'm not using this for this project because it's got the ports that are too small and they don't line up right. But the issue with the intake manifold gasket here is that somebody had installed these on a regular 350 and they had used those kind of aftermarket gaskets, which worked. But what they didn't realize was going on is without that sheet metal in the valley, right? Your stock Oldsmobile has sheet metal covering all of this because oil splashes in this valley as it returns, hot oil. But it isn't the heat of the oil that's the problem. What you can see is that's allowed to splash on the bottom of the intake manifold. Now this could happen in any engine, right? Small block Chevys, it happens too. And the air gap manifolds kind of prevent this problem. The oil is splashing on the bottom of the exhaust crossover in a stock engine, and it is burning, right? It's literally frying on the bottom of this because this crossover gets so hot. It's passing exhaust gas right from the exhaust ports. And you can see that it's coking up right here, right? So what you got going on inside your stock engine, if you just bolt one of these on and you don't use the proper Oldsmobile gasket, is that you're destroying your oil within a couple of 100 miles. And you can imagine that when you bake oil like that, or you boil oil, and synthetic's good for about 320 degrees, they say, but mineral oil, which most of us run because of our old camshafts, it's closer to 220. What do you think that the oil, after it's gone through this kind of treatment, what do you think of its ability to lubricate your bearings is going to be in your camshaft to lifter surfaces, right? So this is a good way to destroy an Oldsmobile engine without ever realizing it. You've got to use, if you're using a heated crossover, that is, if this isn't blocked and it's getting your exhaust heat, as most of them do, you've got to use that kind of stock Oldsmobile sheet metal intake, all right? So what I might do is I'm going to use these gaskets because I have to, because of the port size on them. Unless I decide to go on my die grinder and painstakingly remove the material from these. If I can do it without compromising the embossed raised surface, I might do that. Or I might strike a compromise between the two. That is, pretend this is the one I'm actually going to use. I'm going to use these intake gaskets, and then what I might do is something that I've seen a couple of guys do, and that is take a sheet metal, home make a piece of sheet metal, or use an old Oldsmobile gasket, cut it out so that it lays over here, and then use great stuff or some kind of spray foam insulator, and also kind of screw it down so that I can make this into a non-heated intake manifold, right? That is, I want to protect the bottom surface of that intake manifold from getting hit by the hot oil that's splashing in this valley. Okay. Now, even if you had these blocked, by the way, this is the last thing I'm going to say. Let's say that this were not running exhaust gas through it at all, right? You still don't want hot oil splashing up and hitting the bottom of these ports, because now the hot oil is going to heat them up and heat the mixture and start vaporizing your fuel and compromise your volumetric efficiency. So either way, you're going to